Have you ever wondered why silence holds such power? In a world full of noise and rush, we often value strong words, but we forget that it's the quiet moments that truly make a difference. Today, let's explore an inspiring story about an arrogant disciple and his transformative journey through a seemingly simple challenge: silence. This story is not just a lesson for him, but for all of us, those of us who sometimes get caught up in the whirlwind of busyness and forget the value of listening and self-control. Stay tuned until the end of the video, as I'm sure this story will make you reflect on how we face ourselves and the world around us. Harish and his discontent. Harish is an ordinary man with a simple life, but he faces a major problem within his own home. His wife talks too much. It's not joyful stories or words of encouragement, but complaints, blame, and conversations that seem never-ending. For Harish, each day becomes a battle with his own patience. Harish is not the only one in the world who feels discontent in his marriage. Look at the story of President Abraham Lincoln. Though remembered by the world as a great leader, he too had to endure pressures in his family life. Mary Todd Lincoln, his wife, was known for her volatile temperament and frequent irritability. Lincoln, much like Harish, learned how to face the challenges in his personal life without letting them overshadow his greater goals. One day, when he could no longer bear it, Harish heard about a renowned monk known for his wisdom and ability to solve difficult problems. The monk was living in seclusion in a forest not far from Harish's village. This was Harish's last chance to seek relief from the suffocating burden he endured every day. This story recalls the iconic encounter between Alexander the Great and the philosopher Diogenes. When Alexander visited Diogenes, he expected to receive admiration from the philosopher, but instead, Diogenes simply asked him to move aside so that the sunlight could shine on him. This serves as proof that sometimes even the greatest individuals must learn humility before the wisdom of those who do not boast. Harish, much like Alexander, hoped the monk would provide the answer he sought. With determination, he led his wife through the dusty paths of the forest, overcoming obstacles and even the objections of friends. They couldn't understand why Harish was making such an effort, but for him, inner peace was priceless. Interestingly, Harish's discontent not only reflects issues in his marriage, but also symbolizes the yearning for a more balanced and meaningful life. As Mahatma Gandhi once said, "The silence of the soul is the cure for the entire world." Harish had not yet understood that the solution didn't lie in changing others, but in changing himself. Harish's journey to meet the monk was not just a physical trip, but also a spiritual journey. Just as Emperor Ashoka found enlightenment after bloody wars, Harish was also seeking the path that would lead him to true peace. When he arrived at the monk's humble hut, Harish felt as though he had reached a place where all his worries would vanish. But what Harish didn't know was that this meeting would not provide a quick solution. Instead, the monk would guide him through an important lesson: the lesson of the power of silence and self-awareness. Have you ever thought that silence could be the answer? Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "In times of challenge, we will not remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." Silence, sometimes, is not a sign of weakness, but the greatest strength of humanity. Harish is standing at the threshold of change, but the real story has only just begun. Will he be able to overcome himself and find the answer he so desperately seeks? The Monk's Story. Hide your own insecurities? A simple question, yet one that is enough to make everyone deeply reflect. The disciples' challenge, the power of silence. When the monk gave the disciple the challenge of staying silent for a month, he couldn't hide his overconfidence. It's just not talking. It's as easy as pie, he thought. With this attitude, he accepted the challenge, even proudly believing that he would excel at it. On the first day, everything seemed fine. He worked in silence, observing everything around him without feeling anything particularly significant. But by the second day, the silence began to gnaw at his mind. Not being able to speak made him feel as if he were trapped within his own thoughts. This story brings to mind similar situations in history. Think of Winston Churchill, a great politician and leader, known for his exceptional oratory skills. However, Churchill also admitted that there were moments when silence was a more important strategy than any speech. For the disciple in the story, silence wasn't a strategy, it was an inner battle. By the fourth day, he began to feel suffocated. Around him, the other disciples were chatting happily, sharing small stories from the day. He longed to join in, to share his opinions, and even to argue in order to prove he was smarter than them. But the challenge had locked his words in place. This inner conflict is similar to the story of King Louis XIV, known as the Sun King. Louis XIV once made the decision that he would never publicly argue with his advisors, a rule of silence he imposed on himself to protect his power. But for the king, silence was a political tool. For the disciple, it was mental torture. As the days passed, he felt as if he were being isolated from the world. He could not participate in discussions, defend his opinions, or express himself. One day, when the other disciples were discussing a topic he knew very well, he wanted to dive into the argument to prove he was right, but he had to hold back, and this nearly drove him mad. This brings to mind the story of Nelson Mandela when he was imprisoned on Robben Island. During his many years of imprisonment, Mandela had no right to speak out or spread his beliefs, but instead of letting silence demoralize him, he turned it into a time for reflection and learning, strengthening his will. In contrast, for the disciple, the silence initially was not an opportunity for learning, but a burden. By the 10th day, he could not eat or drink more. The suffocation in his mind kept him awake, and eventually he decided to go to his teacher. Standing before his teacher, he wrote on a piece of paper, "Master, I can't go on. This silence is destroying me. I can't breathe, I can't think, and I feel like I'm about to go mad." The teacher read those words, smiled gently, and then said, "Silence is not meant to destroy you, but to teach you how to listen. When you are silent, you can hear yourself, something you have overlooked before." This lesson is no different from the story of Mahatma Gandhi, who spent many days of the year in complete silence. He believed that silence was a way to reconnect with inner energy and gain a deeper understanding of oneself. The disciple in the story needed time to grasp this. Returning from the meeting with the teacher, he decided to continue the challenge, but this time with a different perspective. Instead of seeing silence as a punishment, he began to focus on observing his thoughts, each emotion that arose. He realized that in silence, he not only heard the voices of others, but also listened to the deeper aspects of his own soul. The inner struggle, the journey of self-control. As the days of the challenge went by, the disciple began to understand that silence was not just about not speaking. It was a much harder battle, controlling his own thoughts and emotions within. At first, he thought silence was simply keeping his mouth shut, but then he realized that inside, his thoughts continued to swirl like ocean waves. He began to question, why do I feel so uncomfortable when I can't speak? Why do I feel the need to prove myself to others? These questions led him to deep insights into his bad habits. He recalled how he used to mock others, looking for opportunities to put them down to raise his own value. This was no different from how politicians sometimes use the strategy of criticizing their opponents to attract attention, like how Richard Nixon faced heavy criticism in his political career. But unlike historical leaders, the disciple had no justification for his actions. He did it merely to satisfy his ego. Through silence, he realized that his ego was the root of all his dissatisfaction. In the early days, he felt frustrated because he couldn't correct others or showcase his intelligence. But gradually, he began to understand that this desire did not stem from kindness or a thirst for learning, but from the need to control and dominate. His journey reminded me of Emperor Marcus Aurelius, a renowned leader of ancient Rome and a Stoic philosopher. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in his Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Through silence, the disciple gradually absorbed this philosophy. Each passing day, he began to focus more on his inner self. He noticed that in situations where he would have reacted immediately before, now he had time to reflect. He had once believed that every word he spoke was valuable, but now he realized that often silence brought greater strength. Let's take an example from history. Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, was famous for his calm demeanor and ability to think carefully before acting. Lincoln once said, "Better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak out and remove all doubt." This simple yet profound advice reflects the lesson the disciple was learning. In the stillness, he also became more aware of his own emotions. He had once been quick to anger when criticized or ignored, but now, instead of becoming frustrated, he learned to listen without reacting immediately. He realized that often his anger did not stem from others' words, but from his own inner insecurities. This inner struggle reminds us of Nelson Mandela. During his years of imprisonment, Mandela not only fought against the external injustices, but also faced his own fears and negative emotions. Mandela once said, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it." The disciple, too, was going through a similar journey, overcoming his insecurities and arrogance with each passing day of the challenge. As the days passed, he noticed changes within himself. The mistakes from his past, which he had once denied, were now clear before him. He no longer blamed circumstances or others. Instead, he accepted that it was himself who needed to change. This was not an easy awakening, but it was the first step toward true maturity. The masters strength within himself. Transformation, from noise to depth. The disciple's transformation began not from external silence, but from a profound inner awareness. With each passing day, he gradually realized that maintaining silence was not just about restraining his words, but also about learning to master his thoughts, emotions, and reactions. Like Abraham Lincoln, who was known for his calmness and careful consideration during times of crisis, the disciple understood that silence brings inner strength. Lincoln once said, "I often take time to listen and reflect, because that is the only way to find the truth." It was this patience that helped him navigate the U.S. through the Civil War, preserve the Union, and end slavery. The disciple, who had once always strived to prove himself superior to others, began to see the futility of this habit in silence. He realized that arrogance and excessive talking were not signs of strength, but weaknesses that concealed fear and insecurity within. This is a similar lesson that the famous writer Mark Twain once shared. Better to remain silent and let people think you are a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. Through the challenge, he learned how to control his impulsive reactions. When he saw other disciples talking, he no longer felt the need to intervene to prove anything. Instead, he observed, listened, and understood that everyone had their own story. His silence became a powerful presence, one that did not require words to make an impact. Another example from history is Mahatma Gandhi, who turned silence into a tool of power. Gandhi often practiced mauna, silence, to refresh his mind and maintain focus. He once said, "In silence, I find my strength." Gandhi's silence was not a retreat, but a way to create inner strength, enabling him to lead the Indian independence movement without resorting to violence. The disciple also felt a similar change. In the past, he had used words to mask his insecurity, but now he understood that true strength did not lie in speaking a lot, but in the ability to control and choose the right words. He began to think carefully before speaking, asking himself whether his words were truly necessary, helpful, and valuable. This transformation also extended to his relationships with others. In the past, he often criticized and compared himself to other disciples to feel superior. But now he realized that silence helped him view others with more compassion and understanding. This is a lesson that Queen Elizabeth II demonstrated throughout her reign. With a demeanor of quiet but unwavering resolve, she maintained respect from both her people and world leaders, proving that actions and attitude are more important than words. By the end of the challenge, the disciple was no longer the same person. He had become quieter, yet deeper and stronger. Silence did not weaken him. Rather, it helped him understand himself, build self-esteem, and create a positive influence on those around him. His story evokes the image of leaders like Theodore Roosevelt, who once said, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." The meaning lies not in being loud, but in having confidence, thorough preparation, and decisive action when necessary. Through his journey, the disciple proved that silence is true strength, a strength that comes from self-mastery. The story of the disciple has come to an end, but the lesson continues to resonate. You see, sometimes silence is not about giving up, but about listening to the inner voice, learning to control oneself, and finding one's true path. Now, I would like to hear your thoughts. What do you find most difficult in restraining yourself? Do you believe that a simple challenge like keeping silent could change your life? Leave a comment below and share your own story. Who knows, your words might inspire someone else. And if you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Buddhist Pathway channel so you won't miss any meaningful stories. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next video.